Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion on Rewiring Minds, the intersection between learning, artificial intelligence, and attention in the modern world today. As we celebrate Schiller International University's 60th anniversary, we are thrilled to explore how advancements in AI and our understanding of attention are reshaping education and learning. We have with us today Johan. Thank you for coming back.
Oh, hooray. Glad to be here.
Johan is a renowned journalist and author of Stolen Focus on how our attention and focus have been eroded by the current lifestyle. And most recently, Magic Pill, which is all over social media.
Attention gets worse, your ability to achieve your goals deteriorates, your ability to solve your problems deteriorates. So obviously I spent a lot of time investigating why is this happening to us, what's going on, and I'm sure we're going to explore lots of elements of it. But I'll just touch on one. I'm really fascinated to hear what Mariano thinks about this as well, because he knows so much more about neuroscience than I do. So one of the ways in which our attention has been harmed, I learned about from a brilliant neuroscientist named Professor Earl Miller. And he explained to me, look, there's one thing you need to understand about the human brain more than anything else. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. This is a fundamental limitation of the human brain. The human brain has not changed significantly in 30,000 years. It's not going to change on any timescale we're going to see. But what's happened is we've fallen, as a result of these technologies, and indeed these technologies are designed to get us to believe you can do many things at the same time. The average teenager now believes they can follow 6 forms of media at the same time. So what happens is scientists like Professor Miller, scientists all over the world, including here in Spain, get people into labs, younger people, older people, and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time, and they monitor them. And what they discover is always the same. You can't do more than one thing at a time. What you do is you juggle very quickly between tasks. You're like, what did you just ask me? What does it say on the TV over there? What is this message on Facebook? What is this message on WhatsApp? Wait, what did you ask me again? So we're constantly juggling. And it turns out that juggling comes with a really big cost. The technical term for it, which is in all the neuroscience textbooks, is the switch cost effect. When you are switching rapidly between tasks, that comes with a big cost. And the cost is you're much less creative, you make far more mistakes, you remember much less of what you do. And I remember when I first heard about this thinking, okay, that's a small thing, right? It's not a big deal. It's a really big effect. I'll give you an example. Hewlett-Packard, the printer company, got a scientist in to study their workers, and he split them into 2 groups. And the first group was told, get on with your task, whatever it is, and you're not going to be interrupted. Just do what you got to do. And the second group was told, get on with your task, but at the same time, you've got to answer a heavy load of email and phone calls. So pretty much how we all live, right? And at the end of it, the scientists studied the IQ of both groups. The IQ of the group that had not been interrupted was 10 points higher. To give you a sense of how big an effect that is, if we all sat down together now and smoked cannabis together and got stoned, our IQs would go down by 5 points. So at least in the short term, being chronically interrupted is twice as bad for your intelligence as getting stoned. You'd be better off sitting at your desk, smoking a spliff and doing one thing at a time than you would sitting at your desk, being constantly interrupted and not smoking cannabis. Now, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. You'd be better off neither smoking cannabis nor getting interrupted. But you begin to see, and that's just one of many effects that I'm sure we're going to explore, but you begin to see some of the ways in which the way we're living are profoundly undermining our intelligence, our authentic intelligence rather than the artificial kind, and profoundly harming our attention.
Yes, I'm glad this audience is not our students today. Mariano, from a neuroscientist's perspective, how does AI interact with our brain's learning processes? Taking on a little bit of what Johan was explaining.
Yeah, I think it doesn't interact in one way. And that may be the critical message. It depends on how we interact with AI. And I think the biggest risk for AI is that in the same way that somehow we've been stolen our attention, and as John has shown many times, and he's just spoken about it, we've also lost our memory. I think all of us, we are in the generation where we remember the phone of our house, our parents' house. We remember the phones of all our friends. Like maybe each of us remembered like 150 telephone numbers. Now it's not just we do not remember them, because you could say, well, I just don't need it. It's that we cannot remember it. So like when you are given the, your verification code in the internet, you read it and then you go to type it, and the moment you have to type it, you have to go back to read it again. And what has happened with memory? And what has happened with memory, it's become atrophied, it's numbed. And this is not a new idea, this is a very old idea. McLuhan, when he began writing about the electric media, there was no digital media, there was no artificial intelligence, he understood that our brain was extended, and in the moment that it was extended to other devices, it also got diluted, it got atrophied, it got numbed. And so you can think we've lost the capacity of memory, we've lost the capacity of navigation. Navigation is maybe one of the most important features, not of the human brain, of the mammalian brain. Actually, one of the few Nobel Prizes in neurophysiology was given to the Mosers in Norway, because they discovered how the brain actually solves the problem of navigation. And children today, when they have to go from some place to another place, and they don't, actually children and us, when we don't have Google Maps or Waze or whatever your favorite app is, it's not just that we do not know how to go, it's we do not know what to do when we do not know how to go. It's like we do not have the references. Here in Madrid, it would be like take the big towers, and you know that that's the north, and maybe you have like landmark of where the mountains are, and then you have some milestones that you can use to navigate. Or even the idea that there may be someone that knows and that you can ask. And so I think there is an interesting, it's hard to define intelligence. It's always been very hard, and so it's hard to define artificial intelligence. But Piaget, the psychologist, the Swiss psychologist, had one way of seeing it, which I think is very useful, which is intelligence is knowing what to do when you do not know what to do. And I think this is actually what makes us humans, is that we face all the times, like you go to a party and you do not know people, but somehow you know how to handle the situation, and you go to a new meeting where you've never been. And this, like with the idea of navigation, I want to give this idea that we're losing not the sense of navigation, but the sense of the intelligence of navigation. And so we've lost attention, we've lost memory, we've lost the capacity of navigation, we've lost to a good degree motivation. So the capacity of staying for 1 hour or 1 hour and a half doing something, because we've delegated our ability to get engaged with something to machines that are very good in the system of engagement. And so there's this, I think, one idea, which is that each time you delegate something to a technology, to a device, we lose it. It becomes numbed, it becomes atrophied. And so if we are going to relate with artificial intelligence on a way that we are going to deposit fully our intelligence on a device, then it's very likely, because that's what's happened with all other human abilities, that it will get atrophied. And I think this is the biggest risk with artificial intelligence, is we just lose the capacity to reason, we lose the capacity to think, we lose the capacity to find our own voice, we lose the capacity to think what are the real questions for which we want to live. But once again, I want to go back to, which is, this is not our relation with AI. It's a very specific relation with AI in which we have deposited completely our intelligence on these devices. And let me close with one example I think we all know, because I think it's kind of important. It's navigation, because navigation is maybe the kind of the path of AI that has gone all the way from the early resistance. We were all part of this. We all, like when we went to a taxi driver and they had Waze or maps, they went like, nah. Like, what is this machine going to tell to me that I am, know the streets of London like no one in the world? And now you get to a taxi driver and you go like, I want to go, to Recoletos 35, and then they go Recoletos 35, and you look at them and you say, your job is not to look in maps. But that's not just them, it's us. Like when you go somewhere, and what's the problem with this? The first one is the one I mentioned, which is we get numbed. We lose our capacity, which we may need. But you may say, well, you will never need this capacity because we'll always have technology, and so we are smart on kind of delegating this ability to technology. But there's a larger problem, which is that what Waze is giving you, or maps, is one path which optimizes something, which is time. And that's not always what you want to optimize. Sometimes you may want to go through the nicest path. Sometimes you may want to go through a path that doesn't bother other people because you're not going through small neighborhoods in which people will be disturbed. Sometimes you want to go through, this is particular in Argentina, you do not want to go in certain streets because they're dangerous or because maybe you feel you may get lost and things may go wrong. And so when you're asking ways to tell you how to go from somewhere to somewhere else, you're asking something which is much more important to that, which is what is the reason for which I should choose one path in turn of the other one. And this is the one thing that if you take it to the domain of intelligence, of writing, of creativity, of reasoning, if in the moment we delegate to a machine the capacity to reason, also we delegate the reason for which we reason, then I think this is the highest risk we have for learning in our brain.
I love the way you put that. There's so many things what you just said. I'm just thinking about it. I think you put that brilliantly. I never heard that Piaget quote before. It's so on the money. And I think it's really worth us thinking about as well. The things the attention crisis robs us of are precisely the things we most need now because they're the things that AI can't do, right? So what can't AI do? It can't really think creatively, right? It can't think in novel and creative ways, not like we can, right? And yet, by robbing us of our attention and de-skilling us in some of these ways, it's actually taking away our superpower, right? So I think this should really inform how we think about education as well. You know, at the moment, we have an education system in most of the Western world that is based around getting us to our children to be like machines. But the AI is going to be much better machines than our kids are ever going to be. We still have school systems based around getting kids to memorize completely meaningless facts for completely pointless tests that measure nothing of any value, right? That's the core of the British education system. That's what it does, right? I mean, you can't think of a dumber thing to be doing in a society where if I want to know what year Henry VIII became king, we can all access that straight away, right? What we want is systems that are built around making our kids creative, around helping them to access their deeper powers of concentration and focus and depth. And that's what the technology is depriving us of, and our education systems are depriving us of. So we've got to deal, I think, with both ends of that.
And that's where my next question was going, because as educators, I mean, it's obvious that technology and AI are here to stay. And, you know, we have these incredible essays coming to us in class, you know, where you know that the person didn't write that essay. So, and speeches, I have to say that we embellish and that, you know, sound much better. But as educators, what can we do? Because there's nothing, it doesn't make any sense to fight against it. How do we incorporate it? How do we take advantage? How do we leverage it in a way that it's going to be advantageous to them throughout their education?
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, I think it's very hard. It's very hard, among other things, because it's going so fast that systems have, like all systems of education, schools, universities, ministries, governments, they have a reaction time which is slower than the pace at which technology is advancing. And so it's interesting because in these situations you start seeing like all sorts of intuitions popping up, and some of them are extremely good, and I think they're worth like thinking about them as a bias of how to navigate in this confusing storm. And so there's in my son's school, he goes to the French school here in Madrid, and 2 years ago, it was like really in the very beginning of this, his English teacher did something which I found was astonishing and worth thinking about, because I think it's sometimes in this one particular case, there is an idea which I think it's more relevant than any general theory that we can construct. And so this is what she did. So the first temptation you would have with GPT is, or in general with artificial intelligence in school, is to ban it, to prohibit it, because it's so confusing that you may say, well, until it's clear, let's just get it out and we continue until we have a norm. But the problem is that it's practically impossible, because you may have all your devices to detect that something has been written with ChatGPT, but children are faster than you, and they will have better devices to write something that will bypass your devices that will detect. and so it's the usual war between cryptographers and decryptographers, and we know who wins this war always. So this is not the right path. So my son's English teacher, she did the following thing. She asked her students to write an essay. It was just a paragraph on English. I don't remember the theme. It wasn't even important. And then what she asked was, give this paragraph to GPT and ask GPT to improve it. And then, I'll explain why I think this is genius. And then the third part was, once you've gotten the response, look at it, look at both of them, see all what has been changed, and make your decision of what you think have been the good changes, the one that you think improve your text, and the ones that you think, maybe they improve it, but that's not your voice, that's not what you wanted to say. So why do I think that this is the right way to do it? First, because it doesn't try to put it under the carpet, which is something you just cannot do. But instead of doing that, it's putting it in the right place. And what is the right place is, it doesn't take your effort out of the job. And I think this is the essential part. In any relation with, I would say with any technology, but in particular with artificial intelligence, if you feel you're losing your attention, your effort, your delivered attention, your sustained attention on something, then it's going wrong. Because it will go in the direction of atrophiation, numbness, substitution. But instead, if you're working on it, and you have technology that allows you to extend your work in a larger direction, and you do then the part of understanding that in the end, it is your essay, and you're going to sign it, and it's your art piece, and it's your artwork, and it's not the GPT artwork. You are deciding what path to choose, where you want to go, and eventually you have someone that helps you in the right place. Then things are very likely to work. So this is the essential part, I think, always in education, and this seems very simple to receive, but I think it works pretty well, is if you have a sense of working hard on it, then things are very unlikely to go deeply wrong in the sense of what is replacing. And this has a history that it's been a long metaphor in technology. Steve Jobs liked it very much, many people, but I think it's worth, once again, and also goes on McLuhan and all the ideas of how these technologies actually replace us or extend us or substitute us. And it's the idea of moving technologies or transportation technologies. So you have a car, airplane, trains. Those things allow you to go way farther than you could. Like you can come from London and then you can be in London. So that's great. But they atrophiate you because you lose your capacity of moving and you lose and so we end up going to the gym and doing all sorts of things because our capacity of using our technology to move, which is our legs, we've replaced them with other technologies. But then you have this brilliant technology, which is a bicycle, which is something in which you keep on putting your effort. It's the same effort you put on walking, but it multiplies this effort so that with the same amount of effort, you can go to places you couldn't go. And so I think we have to think of AI in education as a bicycle and not as a car, or as a bicycle and not a device that will take all of our intelligence, but that we can put the same amount and the same fuel of intelligence, but use something in the good way without losing our voice that will take this intelligence to a broader point and reach things which we could not reach without this technology. And this is true, by the way, I think in work. I mean, I think eventually in any relation that we have with artificial intelligence.
And
I love that way you put that. That's such a brilliant reframing of it. And I think there's a kind of layer below or above or to the side of that, which is thinking about what are the financial incentives driving the use of AI, which I think will completely determine whether it is a bicycle or whether it is something else. So I spent a lot of time for my book in Silicon Valley interviewing people who designed the stuff your kids are using today, right? And the thing that most struck me about them was how sick with guilt they feel about what they've done. Yeah, I interviewed a guy called Dr. James Williams, who was at the heart of designing Gmail and many other key Google products. And one day he was speaking at a tech conference where the audience were like app designers for the stuff we're using all the time. And he said to them, if there's anyone here who wants to live in the world that we're creating, please put up your hand. And nobody put up their hand. Right? Not long afterwards, he quit. He just thought, I don't want to be part of this anymore, and became a really important philosopher of attention at Oxford. And I think one of the things that really emerged for me, because it's absolutely true what you said, this technology is not going away, and none of us want it to go away. We're not saying we want to all convert to the Amish and, surrender our phones, right? So what we have to understand is, at the moment, the apps we use are designed around one particular business model. But there are essentially 3 possible business models for the use of these technologies. And pretty much everyone here will have some experience of these 3 different business models, right? So the business model we have at the moment is, the technical term is surveillance capitalism, which is a phrase that comes from Professor Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard. It sounds fancy, it's very simple. If any of you now open TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you begin to scroll, those companies make money out of you in 2 ways. The first way is really obvious. You see advertising. Okay, we all know how that works. Second way is much more important. Everything you ever do on these apps, including your so-called private messages, is scanned and sorted by their artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out who you are, what makes you happy, what makes you sad, what makes you angry, what makes you horny, and it knows a huge amount about you. It knows much more about you than your neighbor, because your neighbor isn't reading the messages you send your friends at 3 in the morning, right? And it's learning that for lots of reasons, but the main one is to figure out what to show you next to keep you scrolling. For a very simple reason. Every time you open the app and begin to scroll, they begin to make money. The longer you scroll, the more money they make, because the more ads that you see. And every time you close the app, that revenue stream disappears. So all of this genius in AI, all these algorithms, all this genius in Silicon Valley, sorry, all this AI, all these algorithms, when applied to social media, is applied to one thing: figuring out how do we get you to open the app as long as possible and scroll as long as possible. That's it. The head of KFC may be a perfectly nice person, but all he or she cares about is how often did you go to KFC this week and how big was the bucket you bought. All these companies care about in this capacity is how much of your attention did we take. And for as long as that business model is in place, those incentives get more and more powerful. Think about how much better TikTok is at gripping us than Facebook, right? That dynamic will continue unless we move to the other business models. So lots of people have been at the heart of it said to me, we need to ban surveillance capitalism, just like we banned leaded paint, right? Leaded gasoline. We still have gasoline. There's just no lead in it because it harms our brains. In the same way, they said to me, we've got to ban surveillance capitalism and move to the different models. And super briefly, the 2 business models are very different. Everyone here has experienced them. One of them is subscription. Pretty sure everyone here has Netflix, right? You know how it works. You pay a small amount, in return you get access. Crucially, all the incentives change in a subscription model. Currently, the model is going, not what does Bob over there, what does Bob want out of life, right? That's not what they're asking, right? These companies, Facebook, Twitter, they've got a customer service department. We can't phone it. We're not the customers, right? We're the product they sell to the real customer, the advertiser. So at the moment, there are incentives to go, how do we hack and invade you to keep you scrolling? But because you're not the customer. Under subscription, suddenly you are the customer. Suddenly they have to go, what do you want in life? Oh, you want to be able to focus. Let's design our app to help you do that. You feel good when you meet up with your friends offline, not when you look at their photoshopped pictures. Let's design our app to make it easy, encourage you to meet up with your friends offline. Subscription is one model. The third model, everyone has experience of. Think about the sewers. Before there were sewers here in Madrid, we had shit in the streets, people got cholera, it was terrible. Now, everyone who lives in Madrid owns the sewers together, and you maintain the sewers together, right? Just like I own the sewers in London with everyone else who lives in London. Now, it may be that like we own the sewage pipes together because we don't want to get cholera, we might want to own the information pipes together because we're getting the equivalent of cholera for our attention and, I would argue, our democracy, but that's a different conversation. Now, obviously, you want to make sure that was independent of the government. We don't want governments owning the infrastructure. A great model is the BBC, right? The BBC is the most trusted media institution in the world. Everyone in Britain who owns a television pays a fee to the BBC. The BBC is independent of the government. It works for the British people. I would argue we should be doing that with the infrastructure that controls social media as well. But subscription is better. But the key thing to understand is, so long as the longer we scroll, the more money they make, we're going to be trapped in this ratchet, and they will get better and better at applying AI to hacking and invading our attention and other nefarious means.
Very interesting. I want to give an opportunity for the public to ask questions. So before we move on, I just want one last brief question for the two of you. For those of us who are here today, who our vocation and our passion is to prepare the next generations, to educate, to have, you know, a global citizenship, people in the future who, you know, we have our partnership with Unitar, people who are interested in the world being a better place. What can we do? What can each of us here do, as especially from the education perspective, to fight? I mean, you're talking about a very big, almost conspiracy. What do we do to help change that?
Solve that problem first.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You're very kind. This is what we are generous with each other on a very profound and meant way. I'll go back to something I think I tried to go around in the other questions you asked, which is the issue of identity, which is in the end why we are here. I think this is a very fundamental reflection, and it's the one we do not want to lose. Let me, and I'll do that going on something which I think you went on, but my impression was that because of time and so on, you didn't have to conclude it, which is the subscription method, right? Which is, you can subscribe to many things in life, and some are really wrong, right? You could subscribe to clubs that actually do you really wrong, or to ones that do you really right. And we are not very good on doing this. We have, so there are many systems of regulation. The most important one is what's called auto-regulation. We have the capacity. So you're hungry and there's something, but you realize this is not going to do you well, and so you just don't eat it. Or you're hungry and you pass through a restaurant and there is food and you'd want to eat it, but you have a system of regulation which is linked to the system of executive control and attention and so on, which gives you a capacity to control your thoughts and to control what you want to do. But then there's always the question of who is the one that controls the other ones and so on. And this is, I think, what we end up seeing, which is we are in the end, like Whitman mentioned, just, you know, we have multitude identities, and we have contradictions, and the problem is that in our capacity to regulate, we very rapidly converge to versions of our identity that are not the ones we aspire to or that we really want to. And I think, to make this concrete, one thing that was discovered by many of the providers of content, like Netflix and so on, is in the old days, and you'll remember that, you watched a movie, and then you said, I like it, like that's, 4 points, or 5 stars, or 3 stars. And then what they did is, like, I thought this was 5 stars, and you thought this was 5 stars, and so they would look at what else did you like, and they would provide this to me, because we tend to like the same things. But then there was this critical discovery, which I think it's the beginning of the end, and the one thing we need to fight against if we want to change things, which is that they discovered that everybody said they liked the films of Truffaut and Godard, but then they watched the films of Will Ferrell, and this is very profound, because it shows that we all have different versions of ourselves. I want to be slim, and I want to be fit, but I'm also lazy, and I do not want to do sport. And I want to eat good food, but when I see chips, I want to eat them. And I want to, be a good person, but often I'm tempted by things which I would not like to do. And so we have this capacity of regulation, but this capacity of regulation needs to live in a system in which we are not presented with our demons, which we cannot control every single time. So what platforms discovered is that it doesn't matter what you say, which is your aspirational version, what you would like to be, but it matters what you do. And so they keep on giving essentially what you say, I want this, like I want vegetables, but I take like frieds and these things. Here, take frieds, because I know that's what you like and what you cannot take. And so we are losing our identity with this, because we're going into a path in which we lose the capacity of controlling, because in the moment we tell our providers, please do not give me this, it's really hard for me to prevent myself from doing something which I would not want to do, that's what they keep on giving you. And I think that the only, once you understand this, as has been the case with fuel, but also with things which are much more addictive, that have the property of getting ourselves addicted, like cigarette, like drugs, like alcohol, like gambling. These things we need to be protected. And when I say we, I mean adults, but especially teenagers, and those are the ones particularly that now they're not being protected, and they're giving exactly the thing to which they cannot renounce. It's the thing that is so tempting. And so, in my view, and I know this is not a very, but you ask, I mean, this is a personal view. I think that the one thing we can do, as we've done with other things, is finding a system of public protection, of regulation, as bad as this word may sound, that protects ourselves from converging to a path in which we will lose the one thing we do not want to lose, which is our identity.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that in communicating that to young people, I mean, I think Mariano put it much better than I could, but I would say to them, with all the factors that are harming our attention, and there's more than just the ones in our technology, there are sort of two levels at which we've got to respond to it. I think of it as defense and offense. So I would try to equip them with things that we can do immediately to defend ourselves. So for example, I would make it a condition of coming to this university that you download on your phone an app called Freedom. Very simple app. It can sync to your laptop and your phone. So let's say you were addicted to Instagram, right? Or we all have a website that's worse for us, right? Very nodding at the back, very enthusiastically there. Right, so if you install Freedom, which you should do now, come and check your phone in an hour. What it does, you can say to it, do not let me access Instagram for the next 10 minutes, the next 24 hours, whatever it is. And then when you push the button, if you go to Instagram, it just says, you have been set free, right? You can't get to it. There's nothing you can do. So I have social media permanently blocked on my phone because I do not want people to stand up at my funeral and go, Johan was really good on Instagram, right? That's just that's not what I want my life to have been about, right? And so there are loads of things like that that we can equip people to defend themselves with. But I want to be really blunt because I don't feel most people who communicate about attention are being honest with people about this. This crisis of attention is not happening because we had bad habits, just spontaneously. It happened because of these very big and invasive forces. And at some point, we have to go on offense against those forces. We have to regulate them, right? That sounds very fancy, but I went to places that have begun to do it, from France to New Zealand. It is absolutely within our power to do that. And if you think about it, you think about the changes we've lived through, right? Like, I'm gay. The transformation in how gay people are treated in my lifetime is staggering, right? Think about how your grandmothers were treated, right? We still have a long way to go. But if I think about my grandmother's lives, my grandmothers, when they were the age I am now, my Swiss grandmother was not allowed to vote. Neither of them were allowed to work outside the home without their husband's permission. They weren't allowed to have bank accounts because they were married women. It was legal for their husbands to rape them. You think about, that's not a million years ago. That's when my grandmothers, who I loved, were the age I am now. We can change things if we want to. And you know, the constituency for gay rights was 5% of the population. The constituency for feminism was 50% of the population. Attention is fucking up everyone, right? So our constituency is the whole population except Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and even they will be happier if we do this, right? So we have a potential constituency of everyone, but it requires a shift in how we think about these questions. You know, we need to stop blaming ourselves and our children and start getting angry with the forces that are doing this to us. And we need to realize that, you know, we are not medieval peasants begging at the table of King Musk and King Zuckerberg for a few tiny little crumbs of attention from their table. We are the free citizens of democracies, unbelievably hard-won democracies in the case of this country, right? And we own our own minds, and we can take them back if we want to.
Thank you so much. So now I will open the floor to questions.
Yes, just a sec. Let me give you the mic. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Alfredo Uribe, Mexican and German, studied in Heidelberg. So how can we rewire our minds to make the shift from a reactive state of mind to a proactive state of mind? You mentioned it, Mariano, and I think it's in the direction, Johan, that you were saying, from a defense to an offense. Yeah. And I see this in everywhere. Like, we are reacting to the pace of change, going really fast. So how can we, as students, as alumni, what can we take for us, for communities, for kids, to make this shift in our minds to make it more proactive and be prepared for everything else that's going to come. We don't know what's going to come. We don't know what we don't know. So how can we best prepare ourselves by being more proactive?
You know, there's what, if you think about rewiring our minds, there's something that everyone here did in the last 24 hours and that we've all done every day of our lives that rewires our minds, that has changed enormously. Think about sleep, right? What do we know about sleep? When you sleep, your brain cleans itself, it removes toxins, it takes them out of your brain, right? When you don't sleep properly, your attention suffers, your ability to think clearly suffers. We sleep 20% less than people did 100 years ago. The average British child sleeps 85 minutes less every night than they did in 1945. That's an incredible and extraordinarily rapid change, right? Really, like staggeringly rapid. So one thing we can do is sleep more, right? But of course, in a culture where we're constantly encouraged to go faster and faster, think about how countercultural even that message is, right? And how much pressure we experience where we can't do that. So I would say one thing that is literally rewiring our brains and cleaning our brains all the time, sleep, is a thing we've starved ourselves of.
I'll go in a different direction. Very often we do not do things because we think we're incapable of doing them, and we've created narratives. This happens to institutions, it happens to individuals, and often these theories, which we construct, like people say, I'm just incapable of doing music, or I'm incapable of doing art, or having this type of relations, or working in this way, or maybe changing things that seem unchangeable. We often just do not do it because we've convinced ourselves that we do not have the capacity to change. And science has showed us a lot, like a whole lot of experiments have shown us that most often these narratives are wrong. Not always. Like if you say, I cannot fly, this is right, and you should not try it. Or if you say, I cannot run 100 meters in 4 seconds, then this is right. I'm not saying something kind of esoteric, like just believe in something and then it will happen. I'm saying the converse, the reverse to this, is often something that prevents us from doing things. We just think we're incapable of doing it. And I think what Johan was saying, that things often are easier to change than we would foresee. Like you were saying of like big revolutions in the last 30 or 40 years in rights for homosexual people or for women or for other sort of things. One thing you can also think, which I think is a good thing to look, is because I think it's more related to the problem we are speaking, is smoking in public places. Like these are things that from one day to the other one, they have changed. Like in the city of Buenos Aires, I remember because I was there, one day there was, Buenos Aires, everyone smoked. And not everyone smoked, but there was this sense that no one can tell you that you cannot smoke, which was the feeling. And one day there was this idea that it was prohibited, and you could not smoke in public places because you were disturbing other people that had the right not to be smoked on their faces. And if you want to smoke, go smoke and do it in the street and so on. And this was changed from one day to the other one. But what I want to say is that if now someone lights a cigarette in a public place, it's not, or in an airplane, think it about in an airplane. It's not just that it's wrong. It's that everyone will look at that person like saying, are you completely crazy? Like it's not just wrong, it's awful. It's something that you would not even think of doing. I'll give you another example. Using seatbelts on like
I was thinking of that
we
one.
all drove without seatbelts. I mean, I was 6 years old. I was driving, and this seemed completely natural. I biked in a motorcycle without a helmet. I did all things that now it's not just, once again, they're wrong. They would be like, if I see someone and their children are without seatbelts, I feel almost like he's an assassin, which he's not, by the way. But it's so strong that once you've changed this habit, so I think like understanding this idea and looking at case examples for things that seem completely impossible to change, and 3 weeks after, they're not just changed. It seemed like, as you were saying, like this happened 3 centuries ago. And it's not, it's only 10 or 15 days ago. So I think part of it is just understanding that we have the capacity of changing things. And so with this, what we have is the motivation to engage in things which then will be the ones that actually will change the things that we think we are incapable of doing.
So interesting you said about smoking, because my mother smokes 70 cigarettes a day, and there's a photograph of me and her when I'm a baby. She's breastfeeding me, smoking, and resting the ashtray on my stomach, which was completely normal in Scotland at the time. And when I discovered this photo a few years ago, I showed it to her. Oh, she'll feel guilty. She said, "You were a difficult baby. I needed that cigarette."
Okay, next question, Sanya.
Thank you. Yes, Sanya from Heidelberg campus in Germany. Thank you for your amazingly insightful and thought-provoking insights and contributions. So my question really goes a little bit on the back of Alfredo's question, which is about what your thoughts are. I find it fascinating. It's great. I wish we could have more of those, what they call silent cafes now, that are popping up all over. So just in terms of that proactive approach that we can take, what are your thoughts on? Do you think this trend is here to stay and perhaps expand, like going off the grid, I think a few years ago? I wish I could do it, but I have to hold down my job.
I think it's not. And that's also, I think, another very important question, which is also to engage in changes, you have to understand the things that you can change and the things you cannot change. And this is very typical on all literature of motivation and learning and change, which is often people fail. I gave one idea, which is often we fail on making changes because we do not realize we are capable of making. Often we make the opposite error, which is we overestimate the things we can do. And so we have expectations which we cannot achieve, and then we get frustrated because, so this is the typical thing, I want to learn the violin, but it's not that I want to learn the violin, it's I think I can learn it in 3 days. And that's not true. I can learn it, but I can learn it in 4 or 5 years of extended practice. And because I think I can learn it in 3 days, I play the violin, I do not learn in 2 days because no one does. And so I get frustrated and I stop because I had expectations which were not in relation with what we can do. And I think that and Johan will, I think, knows more than I, but that the idea that we can control certain things of how we deploy attention and how we deploy motivation is, and this goes to the idea of the Freedom app, which I will download, but I am skeptical, because I think what will happen is I will download it and I will be very happy, but after 7 days, I will just hate the app and I will just, deinstall it, uninstall it, and I will go back, because the forces of temptation are just too strong. And so this is the idea of, this is what's called usually an Ulysses pact. And I think it's very, so Ulysses, you maybe know the story. He goes and he knows that he will be tempted by the sirens. And so he will jump to them. This is the typical idea of temptation. He understands that, and he understands that this will threaten him because they will kill him. But even if he understands all this, he also knows, and this is the critical thing, that in the heat of the moment, he will not be in the position of exerting this force and by his own will saying, you know what, I will not jump. And because he knows that, what he does is he ties himself to the mástil, ¿cómo se dice? The mast, yeah, to the mast. He ties himself to the mast, which is the constitution he does with himself, with his future self, so that he will not do something that he knows will be wrong for him. And so this is one thing. I do, for instance, one thing I do is, and that works for me, is I don't take my phone to dinner, to my family dinner. Because I know that if I take it, I'm stupid enough that if there's a notification, even though I'm talking with my children about things that are way more important than the notification, I'm not strong enough in this moment to prevent myself from taking it. But I am strong enough to make the commitment in the cold of the moment to let my phone and go down to dinner and not have my phone during the dinner, and so this solves the problem. But this also has a limit. And this is why we need institutional constitutions, which are not the ones we set for ourselves, but there is a society, because part of the problem is you cannot be the only one that does that. And this is more important than any case in children. Like, you can take the social networks of your children, but then they disappear from life because they don't have friends, because all their friends talk through social networks and so on. And so you cannot do it unless there's a system that comes by law that prevents all children from doing something that they cannot do.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think the thing I never understood about Ulysses when you read the original story is that the sirens are half fish. They're like fishermen, but I thought I would find that quite easy to resist. I think people were half fish. But anyway, it's always puzzled me. But maybe I'm just out of touch. No, I think you're totally right. And I think in terms of the silent cafes and the things like that, I think you're absolutely right. So we've got a rise of people trying to personally restrain themselves, and I'm passionately in favor of that. And I think the silent cafe, but it's not enough, right? So you think about the silent cafes, it's really interesting. It's a fascinating example of how our culture has diverged from scientific evidence in such an obvious way. The evidence is really clear. Noise is terrible for your ability to pay attention. There's loads of research, including some done here in Madrid, actually. Children in noisy classrooms, if there's just traffic noise outside or street noise, do much worse than children in quiet classrooms. For reasons that are so obvious, I don't think I need to explain it, but we all have two systems of attention. There's top-down attention and there's bottom-up attention. So top-down attention is what you're doing now, right? You're listening to my words, but if you stop for a moment, if you think, right, I can hear the AC, right? I can see people walking at the back there. There's all sorts. You're filtering all of that out and you're narrowing your attention onto me. So that's a fragile, voluntary process, right? Then there's bottom-up attention, which is involuntary, right? I'd like to think you think what I'm saying is interesting, but if the guy over here started screaming, I'm sure you're not going to, you would all turn and look at him, right? Completely involuntarily. Exactly, right? Completely involuntarily. So if you're a kid in a noisy classroom, for example, the more external stimuli there is, the particularly distracting stimuli, the more effort it is to narrow your attention. You know, it would be much harder for us to have this conversation in the middle of Times Square than it is to have it in this nice quiet room, right? So you think about that, the evidence for that could not be clearer. And yeah, what have we done with offices over the world? We've moved to open plan offices, right? Which are the noisiest possible offices. Everyone hates them, they're the dumbest idea. They don't, and we think they make people collaborate more. The evidence is people even collaborate less in open plan offices, partly because you end up hating the person who sits next to you because you're constantly hearing them on the damn phone all the time, right? So you think about something as basic as that. The science is completely unambiguous about that. And yet, the business world has moved in exactly the opposite direction. It's a really good example of a kind of collective fallacy, I guess, and even a kind of collective madness. So, yeah, people, I think, communicating to people the incredible fragility of their attention, the value of their attention, and the fragility of their attention, and then saying, okay, how can you as an individual protect that attention, but much more importantly, how can we do what Mariano is saying, which is how can we collectively, and I agree with my friend, Professor Jonathan Haidt, ban social media for children under the age of 16, right? We don't let children buy cigarettes, we don't let children get tattoos, do not let children have, I mean, I would actually say, I would go further than Jonathan, I would say 18, but just ban it, right? And we need to change the norms around that. Schools that, again, experiments were done here in different, there's a really good social scientist here in Spain, whose name I'm blanking on, who's compared some regions of Spain banned smartphones from schools and some others didn't. And she compared them. And the ones that banned the smartphones did much better on learning and, crucially, much lower levels of bullying, right? So we know this. We should absolutely, the equivalent of silent cafes, we should be doing that in schools. We should be taking all these bigger social regulations. It's hard enough for us, never mind children, to regulate it just on our own.
Well, I'm afraid okay, well, go ahead, Alex.
So enthusiastic.
This is fascinating.
We have time for one more question.
Apologies, but
You're obviously someone important.
No. It's not every day that we have this privilege. Thank you both, really.
Sure.
I work at the UN, and we are preparing, really preparing, something that will happen on 22-23 October 2024, called the Summit of the Future. And I'm part of one of the task forces. There are 7 tracks, and one of them is on innovation, technology, and the challenges of artificial intelligence. So, rewiring minds, we do understand, you don't have to convince us that there's too much noise, right? But I want to go back to something that Johan said and try to understand how electoral politics, how politics will allow us to do that or not, because I'm a little skeptic.
Oh, yeah.
So how can we persuade politicians that normally want to give whatever it is to the electorate, right, as long as they vote for them, that it would be better to actually have some restrictions? I just came back from Greece at 3 a.m. today, and you will remember Yanis Varoufakis, the former Greek minister, a great thinker that I admire. He was telling us that the business model of the future is data. That's where the money is. So these guys are not going to, the Zuckerbergs and so on, I don't want to use names beyond that. They are not going to just sit down passively. Politicians will start telling them no more. So how to do it? How to persuade the electorate, particularly young people, to vote for those restrictions? Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay if I do. There's two levels to that question. So one is, everyone is conflicted about this, right? Very rarely do you meet a person who say, you're worried about your attention, they go, no, don't bother me at all, right? So there's a big constituency. I think the way to start the political momentum behind this is to start with children. You know, huge majorities of people in polling are worried about children's attention. We're seeing explosions in attention deficit diagnoses and so on. So I think the start is with children. Then we could have a conversation further down the line about measures with adults. I think partly because people will see such an improvement in children when we make these measures. But I think there's actually a layer even before we have that conversation, which is, you said, how do we persuade politicians? These issues are determining which politicians are in the room with you, right? So, I tried to say it briefly, but like I said before, you open any of these apps now, they're trying to get you to scroll as long as possible. That's all they care about, right? So the machinery is set up to keep you scrolling. And this was not the intention of anyone at Facebook or the other places, but that bumped into an uncomfortable human truth, which has been known about by psychologists for a long time. People will stare longer at material that makes them angry and upset than they will at material that makes them feel good. If you've ever seen a car crash on the highway, you know what I mean. You stared longer at the mangled car wreck than you did at the pretty flowers on the other side of the street. Now that has always been part of human nature, but when it combines with algorithms that learn your preferences, it is disastrous. So in the wake of Brexit and Trump, Facebook set up a group of its own data scientists privately, we only know this because someone leaked it, to figure out, did we play a role in this? And what they discovered is this material, the way the machinery works, actively promotes political extremism, right? 1/3 of all the people who joined neo-Nazi groups in Germany joined because Facebook actively recommended it, because it knew that if it recommended things that anger them, they're going to scroll longer, right? Think about Jair Bolsonaro, the grotesque former president of Brazil, washed up and forgotten far-right senator until the Facebook and YouTube algorithms start amplifying him. And the night he won, what did they chant at his election rally? Facebook, Facebook, Facebook. They knew why he'd won, right? This is why one of your colleagues at the UN demonstrated, the Human Rights Commissioner demonstrated the genocide in Burma, Myanmar, was massively accelerated by these algorithms on Facebook. Hateful messages about the Muslim minority, the Rohingya, were massively amplified. So at the moment, you're going to be going into a room with politicians you're going to be much more likely to go into the room, politicians who are the products of these extreme algorithms, right? Not in every case. My country's about to do a sane thing for once, first time in a while. But, you know, so I think there's two questions there. We have to deal with this to deal with the democracy crisis, and then how do we sell this in a democracy? But in a way, I always think your question is too optimistic. How do we sell it in a democracy is premised on the idea we have a democracy where the politicians are not crazy maniacs, right? Try selling it to Trump, right?
Mariano, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think this is great, and one more idea I think can add to this discussion is I think it comes back to the idea of freedom, all of this, and how we relate to freedom. And so there's this saying that goes like, in the US they conceive technologies, and then in China they clone them, and in Europe they regulate them. and this is meant to be critical, you know, how we have this bureaucratic system that actually builds friction on the economy and so on. But we tend to forget how much regulation is essential for for society, for the economy, and I think the clearest case for this is regulation of traffic. And once again, I think we have to think this in the domain of our children, because that's when it becomes clear. We let our children go to the street when we do, because there are traffic lights, because people stop in the red lights, because they don't drive at 200 miles in the streets. If they were not to do that, then we would lose a fundamental freedom, which is the freedom of letting our children walk in their street. And we all agree that it's okay to lose a certain degree of freedom for ourselves, which is regulated, which is part of a pact we do or a consensus we do, so that we gain other freedoms that end up being more important. And I think this is the essence of the debate here. And the reason I bring this is because people do not see the internet as a traffic problem. They do not understand that it's a place where you can be killed by a car. They do not understand that it's a place where if there are no traffic lights and no rules by which people go and stop and regulate the things that they can do and the ones they cannot do, then you're sending your children to a space which is so risky that eventually they may literally die there. And the last thing I want to, and I think it's an important part, and it also relates to things we can do, especially related to our children, which is, I've lived in Europe and in Argentina, and I guess as many of you here that are, like you were from Mexico and Germany, and we have different policies when we are, like, the way I relate to my children in the streets of Buenos Aires is not the same that I relate in the streets of Madrid, because they have different regulations and they work differently. But importantly, because I know this. I've been in the streets of Buenos Aires and I've been in the streets of Madrid, and I think I understand them to a point that I have a policy where I can decide what my children do and what they do not do. But this is not true for the majority of the people in the internet. Their children go to streets, neighborhoods, and places that their parents do not even know they exist. They do not go to Discord, they've never played Fortnite, so they do not understand their spaces. So it's like sending your children to a neighborhood where there are dangers, you don't know that there are dangers, but also you have never lived in this particular place. So I think that also, and this is a very specific idea for parental policies, but I think, once again, it dwells and it extends to other policies, is knowing these places. Because it's very hard to understand the dangers of a street if you've never lived and walked there and understand the value and the privilege what it is of the street being safe for traffic and for other forms of violence. So I think this is also something we can do, and something that we can slowly build in the domain of politics, which is putting in value, once again, the essential idea of regulation. I think this is one of the crises now, which is that there is a very vague idea of freedom in which any attempt of restricting freedom is seen as something that actually will lose votes and will lose traction, political traction. And this is, I think, one important thing where there's a space. And I like things like what Johan is doing of actually popularizing this idea of what we're losing, our attention, and the cost of what we are losing, and trying to build on this, on building on the idea that's something you really do not want to lose. I think this may be a very useful work in the construction of a better politics.
Thank you. So I think this has been a very valuable discussion. Thank you, Johan. Thank you, Mariano, for being here. And I'm going to proceed. We're going to proceed now with our next guest, Otto Sonnenholzner. Yeah, thank you. Careful. Yeah, we're going to take just a few seconds to clean up the floor. Otto Sonnenholzner will be proceeding with Stories of a Global Journey, our alumni testimonials of their extraordinary paths. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have sound? Yes, okay. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be back at Schiller after 20 years now. Thank you for inviting me and my wife, Claudia. It's a pleasure to see how the university grows. It's a pleasure to see how the alumni comes together again. And it was a particular pleasure to listen to Mariano and Johan, so an applause to them. It was a great prepared this very, very interesting speech, but I cannot start without talking a bit about what they were talking about, because they were talking about change. And the only thing we really know about change is that it is constant, as Heraclitus said. And that if you want to make some enemies, try to change something. That's what President Wilson used to say. But we live in an era of change, and change is always faster. As we evolve our technologies and we're able to process information at higher speeds, change becomes faster. And the change we're facing now with artificial intelligence, with social media, it's one of the greatest challenges we're facing as humanity. And you know, as a former vice president of Ecuador, you have to deal with change personally, and you have to lead through change. And the experiences I have had in that matter show me that it is becoming harder to lead through change, that it is becoming more dangerous than it was. And it doesn't mean that change is bad. It means that it can become dangerous, and you have to be aware. Why? And let's take, for example, and I want to connect the prior presentation with my experiences. We live in an era where you need no intermediation to communicate.